Breaking developments tonight out of Windsor. Reports are surfacing of a property so secret, so deeply buried in royal records, that even senior courtiers hesitate to mention its name aloud. The Still House, a secluded countryside villa, once quietly tied to Prince Andrew, has become the focus of renewed scrutiny after new evidence emerged, suggesting it played host to gatherings that may forever stain the royal legacy. For years, every summer followed the same pattern, the royal family dispersing across their grand estates, cameras flashing at Balmoral, Sandringham, and the Riviera. But one name repeatedly vanished from the palace schedule: the Duke of York. No public engagements, no official photographs, no trace of travel records. He simply disappeared. Former palace aides tell us that from 2015 through 2021, those unexplained absences were quietly explained away as private retreats for reflection. Yet behind closed doors, there were murmurs of something far less innocent, a remote estate hidden deep within Oxfordshire's rolling fields, known locally as the Still House. It was a place we were told never to ask about, said one former staffer, speaking under condition of anonymity. Even the Queen's personal secretaries avoided mentioning it. If you asked too many questions, you were quietly reassigned. Locals describe high hedges, winding lanes, and security lights that flickered on at strange hours. Delivery vans arrived after midnight, stayed briefly, and left without signatures. Gardeners rotated every few months. Housekeepers came and went, all signing non-disclosure contracts so strict that one likened them to military silence. At first, few paid attention. Royals value privacy, especially one engulfed in public controversy. After the fallout from the Epstein affair, Andrew's desire to retreat from the world seemed natural. But according to insiders, the timing wasn't coincidence. His disappearances matched the very years when legal investigators abroad were tracking the movements of Epstein's associates. And some of those trails, astonishingly, pointed back to Britain. What began as gossip turned into quiet concern inside palace walls. One senior aide recalls a private conversation overheard at Clarence House. The king, then Prince Charles, was asking how Andrew could vanish off-grid with no protection detail. The answer he got was silence. The unease deepened when an internal audit in late 2024 revealed a financial anomaly: maintenance costs billed to an estate that technically didn't exist. The property wasn't listed under royal holdings, yet payments were made from an account tied to the Duchy of Lancaster, the king's private portfolio. That was when alarms went off, a senior accountant told us. If the Duke was using duchy funds for a property off the books, it meant someone at the top knew, or chose not to know. Then came the whisper that set everything in motion, that the Still House wasn't just a hideaway, it was a venue. A place where select guests were flown in under false names, where no records were kept, and where the line between private entertainment and political networking blurred completely. One former security contractor described a no-device zone enforced by signal blockers. It was the kind of setup you'd expect in intelligence operations, not royal leisure, he said. By the summer of 2025, rumors reached the king himself. It was said that he had grown visibly tense during family meetings, asking direct questions no one dared answer. When he demanded a report, the only reply was that the Still House was under renovation. But what was being renovated? And what exactly was so important that even the monarch's inquiries were deflected? According to a senior royal correspondent, this was the moment the Crown's inner circle realized something was badly wrong. You could sense the panic, she said, not because of what people knew, but because of what they might find. For now, official sources insist the matter is closed. Yet the question remains, where did Andrew go every summer, and who joined him behind those ivy-covered walls? Because if the whispers are true, if the Still House ever hosted the kind of company now being suggested, this story may be far from over. And for the royal family, silence might no longer be protection. It might be proof. Early dawn. A car with no insignia, no convoy, no flashing lights rolled quietly out of Windsor. Inside sat the King and the Prince of Wales. No aides, no attendants, just father and son, heading toward a place even their own household refused to discuss: the Still House. What happened that morning has never been publicly acknowledged. But according to insiders who later pieced together fragments of conversation, it began as a private inspection. The king had been reviewing estate expenditures when the name appeared again, coded, buried in the ledgers, a countryside property tied to the Duke of York. The figure beside it, 6 digits, had been flagged for maintenance. Maintenance for a house no one claimed to own. He wanted to see it with his own eyes, one senior aide said. His Majesty doesn't tolerate shadows in the books. But what he found there wasn't financial. It was human. The journey took less than 2 hours. Fog rolled low over the Oxfordshire lanes, shrouding the hedgerows in silver mist. The gates, wrought iron, unmarked, swung open as if expecting them. Even the gravel seemed freshly raked. The villa rose ahead, wrapped in ivy, every window immaculate, every light off. When the king stepped inside, recalled a protection officer who later saw his written report, he stopped talking, completely. Inside, everything gleamed. Floors polished, curtains drawn halfway, a faint trace of lavender in the air, and beneath it, something sharper, sterile, almost chemical. Every room was staged with eerie perfection. No dust, no clutter, no sign of occupancy. Yet it didn't feel abandoned. It felt paused. Then came the first anomaly. In the dining hall, a long oak table set for 12. Fine china, crystal glass, silverware, aligned with geometric precision. Wine stains marked the linen, as if the meal had ended moments ago. But no one had been seen entering the house in months. Upstairs, the symmetry continued. Beds perfectly made, mirrors spotless, wardrobes empty except for one. Inside hung a single evening dress, champagne silk, still carrying the faint scent of expensive perfume. The king said nothing. William took photographs on his personal device, none of which have ever surfaced. But the true shock waited behind a wall panel in the study. It began with a sound, a faint metallic click when the king leaned against the wood. A concealed latch released, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. He hesitated, said a source close to the palace. But curiosity overrode caution. What lay below was a chamber unlike anything in royal property records, windowless, lined with filing cabinets and steel boxes. In the center, a large screen, cables still attached. On one shelf sat a collection of memory cards, labeled only by date. On another, a leather-bound journal bearing a crest unknown to palace archivists. William opened one of the boxes. Inside were printed photographs, blurred faces, private gatherings, people seated around that same 12-person table upstairs. In several, Prince Andrew was visible, smiling, glass raised. The other faces were harder to identify, men in suits, a few women, one of whom bore a resemblance to a figure from the Epstein investigation years earlier. The king's expression changed completely, the aide said. It wasn't anger, it was horror. He realized this wasn't just a scandal, it was evidence. The journal's pages, sources claim, contained coded references, initials, travel routes, and payments through shell companies stretching from the Caribbean to Monaco. One entry allegedly read, "Dinners to remain unrecorded, guests cleared by J.E." For nearly an hour, the two men stayed underground. No guards were summoned, no words exchanged. When they emerged, they sealed the hidden door and ordered the car immediately. On the drive back, silence filled the vehicle. William reportedly looked pale, his hands shaking slightly. That evening, Buckingham Palace issued no statements. But by nightfall, the villa had been surrounded by private security teams, and all records relating to it were classified under the pretext of structural evaluation. According to an insider who spoke to a royal correspondent, the king held a confidential meeting the next morning. He was furious, the insider said, not because his brother had disgraced him, because someone, somewhere, had helped keep it hidden for years. By the end of that week, 2 senior advisors were quietly reassigned. A third resigned, citing health reasons. The still house itself was locked, alarms upgraded, and its perimeter declared off, limits to press or public. Yet among staff, rumors spread faster than any official memo. "They found something," whispered one palace maid, "something that could destroy them all." The king, usually composed in public, appeared distant in the days that followed. Photographers captured him staring blankly through the window of a royal car. William canceled 2 appearances without explanation. Inside the family, silence hardened into fear. And so, behind the grandeur of Buckingham's gates, preparations began, for containment, for control, and perhaps for erasure. Because if what they found inside the still house ever reached the outside world, it wouldn't just end one man's reputation. It could bring down the monarchy itself. Within hours of the king's secret return from Oxfordshire, palace corridors turned electric. Doors that had remained open for decades were suddenly locked. Access badges were revoked. Telephones went unanswered. By dawn, a single directive circulated through the upper tiers of Buckingham Palace. The still house is now under internal review. No discussion permitted. To the outside world, nothing seemed amiss. The royal family smiled for cameras at a charity gala. Official schedules continued as if on autopilot. But behind that polished facade, a lockdown unlike anything in modern royal history had begun. According to palace insiders, An emergency meeting was held at Clarence House less than 24 hours after the king's visit. Attendance was restricted to 5 individuals: the monarch, the Prince of Wales, the Lord Chamberlain, a private secretary, and the head of royal security. The tone was clinical, almost surgical, one aide later described. They weren't planning a press strategy, they were planning containment. Within that meeting, it was decided the still house would cease to exist. By midday, digital traces of the property began vanishing. Its reference codes were deleted from the Royal Estate Registry. Staff payrolls tied to its maintenance were reassigned to other sites. Surveillance footage from the past 6 months was wiped, and the small team of contractors responsible for upkeep were served with new non-disclosure orders, warning of prosecution under national secrecy provisions. One of those contractors, speaking anonymously, later admitted, "We were called in at midnight, told to pack everything. There were sealed boxes waiting for us, heavy ones. We were told not to open or label them, just load them into trucks and drive to a facility outside London." He claimed the crates were escorted by plainclothes security. By morning, the villa's windows had been shuttered, its gates padlocked, and its name scrubbed from local records. Officially, the explanation came 2 days later in a terse palace memo. The Duke of York's private residence will undergo safety assessments, following reports of structural instability. Few believed it. Within the inner circle, panic grew. It wasn't just about Andrew anymore, said a senior courtier. It was about who else might be implicated. The photographs, the guest lists, the journal, they pointed to names far beyond our borders. In the following days, discreet calls were made to several embassies. According to 2 diplomatic sources, the palace sought to clarify travel authorizations for certain individuals once linked to Epstein's network. One official, speaking under condition of anonymity, said, "The message was clear: keep this quiet, or it spirals." Meanwhile, Andrew's reaction was telling. For a man who had spent years defiantly insisting on his innocence, he suddenly went silent. Neighbors near Royal Lodge reported seeing his car arriving late at night, curtains drawn. "He looked different," one said, "like someone waiting for a verdict he already knew was coming." Then, quietly, the purge began. 3 members of Andrew's private staff were dismissed. 2 former assistants, both women, were offered settlements in exchange for permanent confidentiality. One refused and disappeared from public view. Her social media accounts were deleted within days. A royal historian familiar with crisis protocol noted, "The palace operates on one principle: protect the crown, not the person. When something threatens that equation, the individual becomes expendable." And expendable Andrew was. By the end of the week, legal teams began reviewing every charitable trust and financial account bearing his title. They were erasing his footprint, said a financial auditor. Every signature, every affiliation, gone. Still, one loose thread remained: the story itself. Rumors of the king's unannounced trip began leaking through the press grapevine. Tabloids caught wind of a mysterious royal property under review. Editors received quiet phone calls urging restraint. "It was the first time in years we felt genuine pressure," a Daily Express journalist told us. "They weren't just asking us to hold the story, they were warning us." Inside the palace, the fear shifted from exposure to control. Could they contain the whispers before someone outside got hold of the material? One advisor described the mood as organized terror. The king's patience, once steady, turned cold. Aides said he slept little, often pacing his private study past midnight, replaying the discovery over and over. Prince William, too, was reportedly shaken. A source close to Kensington claimed he'd told a confidant, "If this ever surfaces, it won't just end him, it'll end us all." As for the still house, its transformation was swift. Contractors arrived under new branding, removing furniture, dismantling fixtures, and repainting every visible surface. Locals noticed the emblem on the main gate. The crest, long associated with Andrew, had been replaced overnight with a blank iron plate. Within 10 days, the property appeared lifeless, stripped of history, but the silence surrounding it only amplified suspicion. What had been found? What had been moved? Even among palace staff, theories multiplied. Some claimed the evidence was destroyed. Others whispered it had been relocated to a secure royal vault. A few believed the king intended to keep it, as leverage, or perhaps as a reminder of what power must sometimes conceal. Whatever the truth, one thing became certain: the still house had gone dark, and in its absence, a new kind of shadow crept across the monarchy, one that even centuries of tradition could not easily dispel. Because when the crown chooses secrecy over transparency, it doesn't erase the truth, it only buries it deeper. And sometimes, what's buried finds its way back to the surface. 3 days after the lockdown, the royal facade cracked. The morning papers carried a brief, bloodless statement from Buckingham Palace. His Royal Highness, the Duke of York, will no longer hold military titles or royal patronages. No explanation, no emotion, just 23 words that erased a lifetime of privilege. Inside the palace, it was far from orderly. Sources describe a night of frantic calls between Windsor, Sandringham, and Clarence House. The king's temper, usually measured, was volcanic. He had warned Andrew that discretion was his last defense. Now, with evidence hidden in an underground chamber and whispers spreading through Whitehall, there was only one option left: sever him completely. It wasn't punishment, said a senior courtier, it was containment. The king's priority wasn't justice, it was survival. The decision hit hard. Andrew, once his mother's favored son, found himself isolated overnight. Royal Lodge, his sanctuary since the 90s, was ordered cleared within 48 hours. Household staff were dismissed with 2 weeks' pay and a warning. Do not discuss the circumstances of your departure. By the third evening, removal trucks lined the driveway. Neighbors described seeing Andrew pacing the gardens long after midnight, his figure caught in the amber glow of security lights. A former equerry recalled that scene vividly. He looked like a man who'd been cut adrift, still wearing the crest on his jacket, but it meant nothing anymore. The media narrative, tightly managed, framed the decision as a long-delayed act of accountability. But privately, insiders say the move was intended to bury the connection between Andrew and the Still House before journalists connected the dots. The timing wasn't coincidence, explained a royal correspondent. You don't strip a prince of titles days after a property lockdown without a very good reason. In Westminster, whispers grew. MPs began asking subtle questions about Duchy of Lancaster finances. One opposition figure reportedly asked in private committee whether public money had ever been funneled into properties now under investigation. The inquiry never made it to print, at least, not yet. Meanwhile, palace staff began to notice changes. Long-serving employees reassigned to distant residences. Archive rooms sealed for reorganization. Emails disappearing from internal servers. It was like watching a history being rewritten in real time, one archivist confessed. Andrew himself retreated into silence. Friends who tried to reach him described voicemails unanswered, texts left unread. A family acquaintance said, he wasn't angry, he was frightened. Whatever they found, he knew it wasn't just about him. All in. In the tabloids, speculation erupted. Was this the king's final act of discipline, or the start of something darker? Journalists spoke of a private video, a journal, perhaps even recordings. None were confirmed, but the language grew bolder. The Still House secrets, the Duke's hidden guests, the night that ended a prince. The palace stayed mute, issuing only sterile denials. No such materials exist. The king remains focused on his constitutional duties, yet the silence said more than words could. When Buckingham goes quiet, noted historian Dr. Elspeth Morley, it's never out of calm, it's out of fear. One particular insider claimed the king held a private confrontation before the announcement. He told Andrew that the name Windsor could no longer protect him, that the house had been defiled, and the monarchy couldn't afford to share the stain. The confrontation, if true, marked the last conversation between the two brothers. Afterward, Andrew reportedly tore the royal crest from his stationery and locked himself inside Royal Lodge. His car was seen leaving the property only once more, to deliver sealed boxes to an undisclosed storage unit near Reading. The following day, palace guards escorted him off the grounds. It was the quietest exile in modern royal history, said a commentator from the Times. No plane, no banishment, just the cold bureaucratic erasure of a man who once stood beside his mother on the balcony. Behind palace walls, the purge continued. The Duke's portraits were quietly removed from corridors, his personal coat of arms stripped from official documents. The royal household charities removed his patronage pages, replacing them with the phrase, "position vacant." But even as his name vanished, something unsettling lingered. According to one aide, the king remained haunted by what he'd seen beneath the Still House. He'd sit in his study, staring at the same folder. He told no one what it contained, but we knew. It was the proof, or the curse, that started everything. For the first time in decades, the monarchy appeared vulnerable from within. No scandal, no tabloid rumor, no exiled duchess had ever shaken it like this. This time, the danger wasn't external. It lived in their own bloodline. Yet in royal circles, nothing truly disappears. Files sealed can be reopened. Whispers buried can find new voices. And somewhere between Windsor and Oxfordshire, a former member of Andrew's security team was preparing to speak, a man who claimed to have been inside the villa before the king ever arrived. What he was about to reveal would not only confirm the palace's worst fears, it would suggest that the still house was never just Andrew's secret. It was part of a network reaching far beyond the crown's walls. Weeks passed, and the royal family's public image seemed to stabilize, at least on the surface. The king resumed his official duties, shaking hands, cutting ribbons, and smiling for cameras as though the word still house had never been uttered. But behind that composure, an unease lingered. Then, one rainy evening in late autumn, a package arrived at a London newsroom. No return address, no note. Inside, a leather-bound journal and a USB drive, both sealed in wax and stamped with a faded crest. The same strange symbol the king had seen in the villa's underground chamber. The journalist who opened it later described the feeling as like touching a live wire. Within minutes, the contents were being analyzed. The handwriting matched archive samples from Prince Andrew's correspondence. The pages contained coded initials, payment entries, and location notes. Dates lined up with the same summers Andrew had gone missing from the royal calendar. On several pages, a single recurring abbreviation appeared. J.E. It was like a ghost had reappeared, said one editor. The initials, the references to guest lists cleared by J.E., it was obvious what they implied. The USB drive contained still images, time-stamped photographs from private gatherings. In several, Andrew was visible, his expression relaxed, surrounded by faces half obscured by low light. One appeared to be the same table setting found in the still house dining room. Another, more blurred, showed a yacht deck at dusk, a woman laughing, her face turned away, while two men in suits stood nearby. Insiders close to the investigation later confirmed that some of the names coded in the journal matched individuals connected to Epstein's known circle, a transatlantic network of power, influence, and silence. Within hours, the newsroom received a call. A calm, authoritative voice asked to return the materials for national security evaluation. The caller refused to identify himself, but referenced sections of the Official Secrets Act rarely used outside intelligence operations. The package disappeared before the story went to air. The journalist who'd handled the materials left London a week later, citing health leave. He hasn't been seen publicly since. Inside the palace, panic reignited. The king summoned his private secretary and the head of royal communications. "If the journal exists outside our control," one insider paraphrased, "we are dealing with a contagion, not a scandal." Royal advisors debated whether to acknowledge the leak or bury it deeper. One argued for transparency, that a controlled disclosure could prevent worse damage later. Another warned that any confirmation would unleash a global firestorm. The king's response was final. "This ends with me, no one else." That night, a convoy of unmarked vehicles arrived quietly at Buckingham Palace. Guards were dismissed from the west entrance. Witnesses later claimed that the same sealed folder the king had kept locked in his study was removed and placed in a steel case, escorted away by 3 men in plain suits. A former palace archivist later told our source, "Whatever was inside that case was never meant to survive. You could feel it, that weight of something too dangerous to keep, too damning to destroy." The following morning, a fire was reported at a private storage facility on the outskirts of Reading. The cause was listed as electrical malfunction. No official connection was made, but staff confirmed that several storage units had been cleared hours before the blaze began. Meanwhile, in online forums and alternative media circles, the phrase, "the Still House Files," began trending. Users claimed to have seen fragments of the leaked material, blurred images, transcribed pages, coordinates. None were verified, but the timing was enough to reignite public suspicion. For historians, the symbolism was chilling. "It's the perfect royal paradox," said Dr. Morley. They believe destruction equals protection, but in the digital age, nothing truly disappears. The king's next appearance was at a remembrance ceremony. He looked composed, almost serene, but those close to him noticed the tremor in his left hand as he laid the wreath. One aide said softly, "He's carrying the weight of something none of us can name." If the journal's contents were real, if the initials, the payments, and the faces matched what the whispers claimed, then the Still House wasn't just a scandal buried in brick and ivy. It was a map, and somewhere, someone still had a copy. Years have passed since the name Still House vanished from royal vocabulary. To the public eye, the monarchy gleams untouched, polished ceremonies, perfect smiles, and rehearsed gestures of continuity. Yet behind the gleam, insiders say the silence has grown heavier, almost ritual. "It's not denial anymore," one former advisor confided. "It's endurance. The family survives by pretending that night never happened." The villa itself no longer appears in any registry. Officially, it was sold to a private consortium through a chain of offshore companies. Locals, however, whisper that no construction ever took place, no workers ever arrived. On certain foggy nights, they still see lights flicker behind its shuttered windows, faint, rhythmic, as though someone were still moving inside. Within royal circles, the fallout never truly ended. Prince Andrew lives quietly under a different name, rarely venturing beyond Windsor. His presence at family events is tolerated, not welcomed. "He's a ghost," said a palace staffer, "alive, but erased." The king, meanwhile, carries himself with the composure of a man who made a choice that saved the crown, but at a cost only he understands. Some nights, according to a former footman, His Majesty still wakes abruptly, muttering one phrase, "Burn it all." Whispers persist that copies of the leather journal survived. A small, encrypted drive allegedly made its way overseas, offered to a European reporter before vanishing again. Every few months, an anonymous post surfaces online, claiming to hold new evidence. A blurred photo, a half-finished scan of handwriting, a map with coordinates in rural Oxfordshire. Most vanish within hours. The digital ghosts of the still house remain unverified, untraceable, but never entirely gone. Those who once served close to the family say the discovery changed more than reputations, it changed loyalties. "After that summer, trust disappeared," said one former communications officer. "Every conversation felt like surveillance. Every word was weighed." Historians will one day call it the Great Quiet, the moment the British monarchy learned that its greatest threat wasn't rebellion or scandal, but the truth itself. For centuries, secrecy has been its armor. But what if that armor has become its prison? Perhaps that's why, to this day, the royal archives remain sealed under an indefinite protection order. Requests to access correspondence from the years between 2015 and 2021 are repeatedly denied. The official reason: materials classified for preservation of national integrity. Unofficially, a warning that some history is too corrosive to expose. Still, silence cannot erase the echo. Somewhere beneath the ivy and the centuries of denial, the still house waits, its walls holding the memory of those nights when power mistook itself for immunity. And maybe that's the lesson behind this entire affair. No matter how tightly the crown guards its secrets, truth always finds a fracture to slip through. If you followed this story from the beginning, thank you for staying with us through every revelation, every whisper, and every unanswered question. But remember, this might not be the end. The next leak, the next sighting, the next voice ready to speak could change everything we think we know about the still house. So, stay alert, stay curious, and subscribe for the next investigation, because the silence beneath the crown is never really silent.